Welcome everybody to the high-level roundtable on jobs and growth, brought to you by the World Bank and the European Commission. This is the first time that we've got so many stakeholders involved in jobs and growth. And just to make sure that we all connect, turn to your right, say hello to the person on your right. Turn to the left and say hello to the person on your left. I notice there's a little bit of reluctance here, but I feel we're getting the hang of it. Very good. Now you know some of the stakeholders who will be talking this afternoon. Today, it's going to be a fast-paced session. We have an exploration of ideas and thoughts, potential partnerships as well, and it's going to be a time session. The time is going to be very short, and we have amazing people to hear from. They will see a little clock pop up on these screens here. And that clock will count down from 3 minutes. So if you're not speaking, this is extremely enjoyable, watching their time ticking away. If you are speaking, it's a little bit stressful, but it means that we get as many people into the conversation as possible. Normally, I'm a very kind, generous person. Today, I'm going to be a time tyrant. We have so much to do, so let's get started with the CEO of the World Bank, Kristalina Georgieva. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. With this timing, you brought me back in the days I was sitting in that chair as corporate secretary, and I introduced the 4 minutes maximum speaking time for our executive directors. So I'm given a little bit more than my own max. Let me get straight to making use of it. Let me say that there is nothing more important than to think about ways in which we can successfully, collectively generate more investments, more jobs in the future. We all know the numbers. By 2030, there would be 600 million new entrants in the job market. 2/3 would be in developing countries. And the question we have to ask ourselves today is, will the jobs be there? What would it take for these jobs to be there? And will people have the skills to actually fill these jobs? In that very room, this is our boardroom, we have had, over the last year, many discussions concentrating on how we can mobilize more finance for development, and how that mobilization could be as much as possible private sector driven. And we have concluded that there are 3 things that we can do collectively more of. The first one is to be much stricter with ourselves of how we use public money. The best use of public money is to remove barriers for private investments to take place. And that we have to build as discipline in our engagement in the World Bank. That is a very clear prioritization, identify why investments are not happening, what are the barriers, and what can be done with good policies to remove these barriers. Just to give you one example, in Egypt, we have worked very hard to get the share of energy subsidies down. By doing so, the energy sector became more competitive, and we now see some $14 to $16 billion private sector investment happening, primarily in renewable energy, energy efficiency, so it is sustainable development we support. The second conclusion we drew was that we are not working hard enough to come up with instruments that are making that entry of private investments more likely and more sustainable. For example, use of guarantees. We talk a lot about blended finance. And that reminds me the days when I was in the European Commission, when we came up with the so-called Juncker plan, which is no more, no less than creating a strong confidence builder, a guarantee in the European Investment Bank that allows for businesses to be stepping up to the plate with first risk loss or other instruments taken away. So that use of money in that way is critically important. And the third thing we realize is that in the end, the most critical job creation comes from SMEs, comes from the small businesses, and therefore we relentlessly have to work on making funding available for small businesses to actually be able to step in, and especially to make sure that men and women can have access to finance. So from the side of the bank, we now have some $75 billion in the investments that have a job angle, and we relentlessly learn from these projects so we can do more, we can do better. And with 11 seconds to go, thank you for being here, and the floor goes to my brother, Commissioner Mimica. Right on time. Did you see that? Bing.
Yeah.
This is impressive. The rest of you speakers, take note. Commissioner, good afternoon.
I will take note. Good note. Well, very good afternoon, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Dear Kristalina, as always, it is a privilege to co-host this event with you. The European Commission and the World Bank are close and long-standing partners. We share many of the same objectives, including that of today's discussion on how best to use our private investment instruments to maximize decent job creation. We all know the scale of the challenge. By 2040, sub-Saharan Africa will need between around 40 million new jobs in order to absorb for the next generation of labor market entrants. To understand the scope of the challenge, I note that only 3 million jobs are currently created each year. Furthermore, the greatest employment needs will be in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Today, these countries only receive 6% of foreign direct investment, and the cost of doing business in them can be at least three times higher than elsewhere. The private sector provides 90% of jobs in our partner countries, in Europe as well. The majority in small and medium enterprises. They are an essential partner, therefore, in creating sustainable jobs and inclusive growth, and maximizing the skills and spirit of future generations. In line with our commitment to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, the European Union launched last year the European External Investment Plan. Our objective is to create the conditions that allow our partners to mobilize additional private sector resources in support of their sustainable development. By doing so, we also hope to attract private investors to where the business opportunities are. Also, by using available public funds, we want to leverage a maximum of private money, initiatives and innovations. The European Investment Plan combines flexible financial guarantees with technical assistance and strategic policy guidance to improve business environment. Our aim is not just to provide financial incentives to responsible investors, but also to improve the overall business climate and the social and environmental impact of investment. The new European plan has its European Fund for Sustainable Development guarantee, and this has already attracted a lot of attention. We have received innovative and high-quality investment programs proposals from dozens and trusted partner institutions, including the International Finance Corporation. The value of these proposals already far exceed the 1.5 billion euros we allocated for the guarantees, for the de-risking mechanisms. And we expect to sign the first guarantee agreements now by summer of this year. Now, our challenge is to make sure that these investments maximize decent job creation. This should be done without sacrificing growth in the most innovative sectors, nor high value creation. In order to do so, we have, by creating a specific investment window, geared an important part of our support towards micro, small and medium enterprises. They are essential components of local ecosystems and key drivers of employment creation. We also take pride over prioritizing investments such as renewable energy that are labor intensive in the short term, but also essential enablers for job creation in other economic sectors. Last but not least, the potential of direct and indirect job creation of a given investment is an essential criterion in the selection of the proposed investment programs to be covered under the guarantee. As a matter of fact, we are working very closely with the World Bank to improve our methodology and develop the best tools towards this objective. I'm very happy to be here today and to continue our lively exchanges of ideas and best practices on job creating strategies like this one and the World Bank's maximizing finance for development initiative. We need to find the best ways to put them into practice on the ground and to maximize the synergies between them. I believe we can do this in a number of ways, including by sharing data, knowledge and analysis, through staff exchanges, joint training and events like this one today. So thank you all for your participation, and I look forward to hearing how we can all learn, improve and move forward together. Thank you. Oh, I was not close to...
Thank you very much, Commissioner. It's all right. Don't be embarrassed by your timekeeping. And we can use our notebooks right now. You're using your notebooks because as you hear people speak, you may well have comments that you might want to ask them. We will have time to do that. Again, your comments have to be as succinct as the presentations, but I know you can do that. Let's start with Michael Froman. He's the Vice Chairman and President of Strategic Growth at MasterCard USA. Michael, welcome. Great to have you here. If I had to put you on the spot and said, okay, what is the most appropriate role for the private sector when we're trying to create these jobs, particularly in fragile states, fragile parts of the world? What should private sector be doing? What's their role?
Well, thank you. And in the green room before, our moderator told us to be brief and provocative. So let me start by being provocative. There's a lot of discussion here this week about technology and the importance of technology. And we now know that pretty soon we'll be able to print a sneaker down the street from our house. We'll be able to customize and print a sneaker. We'll be able to make robotics do a lot of the sewing that goes into textiles. If we look at this building and the history of international development, much of international development has been based on low-wage labor manufacturing. What happens when there's no need for low-wage labor manufacturing going forward? In this country, we're having a big debate about the future of work and how to help people make that transition. And that is a challenge, but I'm even more concerned about the challenge facing developing countries who have been working on a path towards industrialization precisely at a time when industrialization may no longer be as relevant as it once was. And what will be their growth strategies be going forward? I think that underscores just how creative we have to be in trying to do the job creation in developing countries that the Commissioner and the CEO just spoke of. There's a role for philanthropy, for corporate social responsibility, but ultimately, if we are to achieve truly sustainable development, it's got to be led by private sector, for-profit, risk-adjusted return-oriented activity. And in that regard, I just will mention a few things. On the philanthropy side, the owners of MasterCard were very wise when they went public. They set aside 10% of the shares into an independent foundation. They had no idea how valuable the shares would be. It's now an $18 billion foundation, one of the largest foundations in the world. And it just rolled out a new strategy called Young Africa Works, with the goal of putting 30 million new jobs on the horizon in sub-Saharan Africa. But ultimately, if we're going to achieve this objective, companies like ours and the private sector more generally have to figure out how to tweak their business models so that they see that it is possible to do well by doing good, not just doing well and doing good, but doing well by doing good. We're exploring that by, for example, our Kenya labs with the Gates Foundation, taking our technologies and making them into development and humanitarian tools, giving tools to small shop owners in Kenya where they can now digitize their payments to their suppliers and from their customers so they can develop a credit history and that banks can then lend to them so they can expand jobs. That's the kind of thing we need to do more generally, and I think a lot of us in the private sector need to figure out how, as we play a role in the social sector, that we can make sure our business models reflect that.
Michael, appreciate that. There's an initiative called Solutions for Youth Employment that MasterCard is involved in. Do you want to say in a sentence what that is, why that's important?
Well, I think we're looking really across the board at all the things that we can do to help create jobs and then give the youth the tools that they need, from education and training to information about where the jobs might be, so that they can make that transition into the workforce.
And Solutions for Youth Employment is a coalition which the World Bank convenes.
Absolutely.
Michael, thank you. I'll come back to you a little bit later. Suma Chakrabarti is the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. You may know it as the EBRD. So, President, what measures do you think that development finance institutions have to take to actually embed jobs in their support to help the private sector and then also beef up finance?
Thanks, Remy. Well, let me talk about private sector jobs, and I've only got 3 minutes, so I'll do it on 3 levels: macro, micro, project level, and internal as well. At the macro level, I think fundamentally, first of all, ask the private sector what sort of skills they're looking for. Too many of the education systems, vocational training that is done in many of our countries doesn't really match what the private sector actually is asking for in terms of skills. Secondly, I think face up to technology and the way that Michael just talked about and what it means to work. And that's different in different places. Reshoring is happening in Eastern Europe. That is affecting value chains, for example, in Eastern Europe. And that's a big issue, I think, for them there. Thirdly, remove barriers to employment categories. Women. In many of the countries EBRD works, actually women are actually banned by regulation from working in certain industries. So policy dialogue to try and persuade governments to actually remove these regulations, because it's actually not using the full productive potential of the economy. Fourthly, I would say work more with greener firms, because the research shows that greener firms create more jobs more quickly. And fifthly, just move to more productive industries, because they also create more jobs. That's a macro sign. At the micro, let me give you 2 examples from what EBRD does. One is a corporate example, and one is the SME example. At the corporate level, I think the project that had the biggest impact on me in my 6 years at EBRD in this area would be working with Istanbul ferries. So Istanbul ferries, when we started working with them, couldn't work out why so many of their passengers were just men, the commuters. There are very few female commuters, and yet many Turkish women work. And it turned out, as soon as we did a survey with them, that it's because there were very few female staff on these ferries. And so women did not feel that safe getting on these ferries. As soon as they changed that, win-win. More women got employed, but also more female customers on those ferries, profitability up for Istanbul ferries. That's a good example of how job creation is good for profitability. On the SME side, I would say the job creation, particularly focusing on credit lines for youth employment, but also credit lines for women in business as well, again, to encourage jobs for women particularly, and also some direct interventions too. And internally, this is very important. We are a bank full of bankers who are motivated by incentives. They're not public sector workers. They have different incentives. So you have to think about scorecards, group and team scorecards, the performance reward system that actually incentivizes creation of jobs through projects that we work on. And also, in terms of explaining the power of what EBRD does, a results framework that, again, has jobs in it. So you actually can show that you've made a difference at year end as well. And you can use it as a communication tool for showing real impact on the ground. So there we are, macro, micro, and internal. And I've got 6 seconds left, so that's good. Thanks.
Well done. Kristalina, CEO, you're nodding and you're umming a lot. Vocalize some of the ums for me, for us.
Well, two quick points. One is the recognition that the future is much less predictable than when I was in my youth. We are faced with an incredible capacity of technology to change the way we work, we live. And we have to recognize this is making the task of job creation much tougher. Take Bangladesh. They're already putting automation in the garment industry. Previous years, Bangladesh would create 350,000 jobs. Last year, they created 60,000 jobs only as a result of that shift. So I was nodding because that means that we have to be much more agile and adaptable in the way we think of these financial tools that create opportunities and open up space for new jobs to come, jobs that we have no idea what they would be. And I was also nodding on the issue of internal incentives in our institutions. We have to get those incentives to make us all stretch, make us all open up space for innovation in a way that is rather scary for these institutions. Why? Because we are created to be very conservative in the way we approach financing. I was giving an example to people that we are like this man that has suspenders, belt, and hands in pockets so the pants don't fall. We have to at least put the suspenders so we can actually create that more innovative environment. I see colleagues from IFC, we are working very hard to combine prudency in financing with that ability to open up more incentives. And I also was nodding like this on women, opening up more opportunities for women to participate in the economy.
I'm glad I asked. Agnes Kalibata is the CEO of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, also known as AGRA. CEO, what do you need? What support do you need to create more green jobs?
Thank you. The institution I work for, AGRA, spends time really looking at how farmers, farming communities, SMEs, and agriculture in general can become more productive and create more jobs. So we need to form and build partnerships with the right institutions. When we look at funding institutions, there are a number of things that have to be in place for us. Today, a lot of financial institutions out there do not have sufficient appetite to fund the things that will create jobs in the farming environments that we work in. They are looking for beautiful and well-performing SMEs. We have very few of those in the agriculture sector. And yet, the opportunity to create jobs is great. They are looking for financial returns and more than probably development impact. And development impact is very critical here because where there's zero private sector in existence that needs to be created from the ground, development impact needs to be needs to be parameter number one. We need also to think about additionality. Instead of creating new tools, today we have FAO was reporting that we have over 63 financial instruments in agriculture in 2016, which are performing suboptimally, and we still create more instead of thinking how to optimize those. From a public sector perspective, there are two things that I think that are very critical that we need. We need to look at how we build markets that are not distortionary, and so partnerships that with the public, with governments that are looking to do that would be extremely interesting. We also look at policies that will not crowd out private sector. So if we can find a few people that are willing to work in those areas, that are willing to promote the right policies, then we might start seeing businesses grow in the food area, which is right now a $40 billion market on the African continent. So I hope I've answered.
Thank you. I am just wondering, anybody got any thoughts or questions so far? Put your hand up. All right, very good. I will remember where that hand came from, and I'll ask you in just a moment. I've got one more speaker in this section, Minister Ledhari. Is the Minister of Development, Investment and International Cooperation in Tunisia. Minister, I just want you to give us a reality check here. Governments promoting investments and job creation in a high-risk context, why would they even do that? Either persuade us or give us a reality check. What's the challenge here?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, when you are in transition like Tunisia, you are by definition in a very high risk context. It's a period of uncertainty, it's a period of instability, where people made a revolution, create a tremendous change, and it's not in theory the favorite moment to create investment and to launch a new business. For this reason, the role of the states actually and the role of government is crucial. How you can manage this situation, and especially in a context in which you have major, very high expectations from your people, and you have from your youth, especially, a very big demand, which is related to create jobs and offer and expand economic opportunities in especially in the regions in which there is a lack of infrastructure and private sector activities. I think that what we are doing now in terms of removing barriers and reducing bureaucracy is crucial. And I think the role of government is, from this point of view, is very important to unlock the potential of the economic potential of the population, and to offer the most attractive and competitive at most framework, especially on a legal point of view, the legal framework who can attract investors from outside the country and within the country. And for this reason, we in Tunisia, in this context of transition, we emphasized the role of business environment and business climate to offer an attractive legal framework that create the desire for our enterprises to generate economic opportunities in the different promising sectors. So the role of the state is to stimulate, to encourage, and to orient investment in this very high-risk context.
It appears you also stimulated some questions. Sir, who put his hand up? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Máximo Torero from Peru. So I have two questions. One is, none of you have referred to informality and the quality of jobs. And one of the major problems we face in developing countries is the huge amount of informality. So what we can do to resolve that, and how we can create jobs which are of quality, which is what we are aiming to. And the second one is the issue of automatization and specialization. And here, I am worried to hear that we are talking of technology, that we are driven by technology, when we should be driven the technology that we want to use and when we use it. So it's okay that we have in Bangladesh automatization in the garment industry, but Bangladesh should move to higher value added that requires more labor, because that's what they have cheap. They have a huge labor supply. So how we can do that shift so that we choose our portfolio of technology with the comparative advantages we have in certain types of inputs. Thank you.
I hear recognition for that point. We still have more speakers. I'm interested if they can take on that challenge. Yes, sir, you put your hand up to me. Gentleman with the glasses. I'll come back to you. The Minister of Norway, the Minister of International Development in Norway, was making notes. Now, he's either making notes of what he's about to say or making notes of what he heard. I am not sure which one it is. Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I thought MasterCard made an excellent point, that in high-income countries, we're all worried about how we're going to face the transition with the digital economy. Now, the truth is we're already facing it. The market forces are doing that job for us, and new jobs are created all the time, which is great. But our development tools are maybe pointed in towards yesterday's jobs rather than tomorrow's jobs. And this is a challenge, I think, the development community, and Norway as a big donor as well, has to address and give a hard think. Because this is also an opportunity to leapfrog in developing countries. And we should take that opportunity. But for that to happen, I mean, the developing countries, they represent huge opportunities. They are emerging markets for a reason. The word emerging is key. This is where the new opportunities are going to be, and there needs to be a conducive and attractive environment for private investors to enter into developing countries, and there needs to be also a willingness in developing countries to open up, because this is also the case sometimes, that the willingness in practice of opening up to foreign investments is lesser than it is in theory. They all say, welcome. And then there are currency barriers, and there's unpredictability in tax systems, and there's unpredictability in regulatory frameworks, which makes it very difficult for investors who are, of course, aware of the risks to actually make that step and make that huge commitment that we're seeing. So we need to address these things, help build capacity, help build the right skills, not skills for a particular job, but skills that can last whatever the the labor market looks like in the years to come. And we need to make sure that this is where development tools really can make a difference, that those investments that are made, those huge investments that are made, actually give development effects. Now, I'll give you one example. We have a Norwegian fertilizer company who is about to invest $1 billion in Ethiopia. Now, we are coupling what they're doing with investment in vocational skills so that they don't have to do what a lot of other foreign companies do, fly and work qualified workers from abroad. We need to make sure that these huge investments actually have a development effect, and that is, I think, very important. On Norway's side, we're also working on Oil for Development program, which is about building capacity and predictable frameworks in countries that have an oil industry. Fish for Development, the same. Sustainability is also important in that context. And lastly, tax for development, hugely important to have a tax system which is predictable for everybody, and which also ensures that the host country actually is left with the proportionate and fair share of the value creation that happens in that country. And of course, in this, fighting corruption is extremely important. In today's world, a foreign company is not going to enter into a developing market where there is a lot of corruption, because it's just not acceptable to customers, to shareholders, to anybody. Thank you.
Minister, Norway is also very active in solutions for youth employment. What does very active mean?
It means we're doing a lot. We are very active in that. And I think this is about also building skills for jobs, making sure that the young population have the right skills to match the demand from companies. And what we're seeing, and again, I think this is an important point, that we need to match the demand with the right skills and make sure that we don't educate young people to jobs that are not there and will never be there. And this requires, I think, a very pointed approach to this subject matter.
Commissioner, what's the most interesting thing you've heard so far that you haven't said yourself?
Well, I was tempted to nod on so many of the statements of the colleagues around the table, but then I suddenly realized that you might ask me to vocalize and I wouldn't be able to remember all of the reasons for nodding. Therefore, maybe only one I would like to point, and this goes very much in line what the minister just said. It's really about creating better, or assisting partner countries in creating better employment capabilities, capacities, and employability capacities. I just visited a few weeks ago two neighboring but different type of partner countries, South Africa and Zimbabwe. But in the both of them, the programs we launched were about employment, creating jobs, and employability, making more skillful, more vocational training for people to be able to employ. So therefore, it seems to me that the best contribution to these processes, to such the both types of actions here, coming here from this event, actually should go somewhere along these lines: how to create more employment and how to create more employability around the world.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I don't want to scare anybody away from nodding. It just means that you'll be in the conversation. And if you don't nod, you'll also be in the conversation. So go ahead and nod. Wafa Salem Al-Ashwali is the CEO and co-founder of Service in Saudi Arabia. It is good to have you at the table. This is such an ambitious agenda. The fact that we're all gathered together from all over the world and we're all thinking about how do we create better jobs, how do we create more jobs. What should we be remembering in terms of what might the parameters be? How do we think about this in a way that's actually practical?
From a private sector point of view, I would like to go to basics, where I think one of the most important parameters is a clear definition for each party role, whether a government or private sector. If we want to create jobs led by the private sector, then it is fair that we define the role of government of facilitating the private sector growth and work. We need from the governments to improve infrastructure, and with infrastructure we're not talking about roads and power and water only. Now we're talking about technology. As per recently we're talking yesterday about that how platforms improving entrepreneurs' growth and success. So increasing number of connected people or online people will increase the prosperity of these small businesses that can benefit from these platforms. In addition to increase the bankable people or the ability to exchange payments using the online systems. This is critical to increase and improve job creation using technology. Another important point, I think, is education. If we want to increase jobs, we need to produce people that can fill these kind of jobs, which is, if we're talking about technology, we need people educated on technology side. This is, I think, my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate those. The Vice President of the European Investment Bank is Ambroise Foyol. It is great to have you here. Vice President, what have we not thought about so far? What is a sort of facepalm moment or comment that you want to add to our conversation this afternoon?
What I would add from the European Union's bank perspective is what I think is important if we want to really develop the volume of activity we can provide collectively. And I would say three things. We need to facilitate the crowding in of private banks. We need to promote new instruments, and we need to develop new funding. And if I just say a few words about these three ideas. Facilitate the crowding in, actually, that's what Kristalina stressed in her intervention. When you talk to bankers in particular, what they often say is they would like to be more active, but the level of risk in many countries is so high that they cannot go with big volumes. And what we can do as public institutions is to come with the kind of instruments like the first loss pieces that will allow them to take more risk because they know that the first losses will not be taken by them. What we need also to promote is new instruments, and in particular new instruments in favor of local private sector development, such as instruments to develop credit lines to local banks, often also in local currencies, or to develop risk sharing with financial institutions, or also to develop equity and private equity. And there are many interesting initiatives, one being done with the European Commission and the African Development Bank, which is called Boost Africa, to invest in funds that are going to invest in private sector startups in Africa. And I think that's the kind of initiative that we need to develop. And finally, develop new funding. We need to develop this. In particular, we have announced this morning the launch of a sustainability awareness bond this morning. We have selected water as the sector that we want to invest the funds that we are going to, or the bonds that we are going to issue in. This is a mature sector. We need to find ways to attract also new investors for specific sectors, and I think that's important with the prospect of the SDGs.
Additional thoughts around the table and in the room. Can you just put your hand up so I can see where the thinking is happening? Aha, very good. Oh, thinking's happening at the table. That's good. No thinking happening behind the table. We have to rectify that. We have some time. All right, I will come back to you, but not before I go. I'll go to Daniel Epstein. Daniel is the CEO of Unreasonable USA. Do you want to explain what that is, Daniel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I should start by doing everybody a favor and rationalizing a seemingly irrational name, which is why Unreasonable. Our name's inspired by the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. He once said that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. And in essence, in a world where 1.3 billion people don't live with electricity, where 770 million people don't have access to clean drinking water, if George Bernard Shaw is right, we believe we can't afford not to bet on unreasonable individuals, which begs the question, who are the world's most unreasonable people? We believe those are entrepreneurs. They look at the status quo and they have a healthy disregard for it. Where most people think it's impossible, they see possibility, and where we see market failures, they see market opportunities. So we back entrepreneurs who are positioned to solve the world's seemingly intractable problems. So we have 123 entrepreneurs in our portfolio. They've raised about $3 billion in financing. They've generated about $1 billion in revenue, impacting about 500 million lives around the world. And the common DNA of all these companies is they're trying to do the impossible in terms of societal or environmental challenges. I do have to say, I say all that humbly. There's a quote that I disagree with, but it's that those who can't do teach. And I like to say that those who can't do or teach do what we do at Unreasonable. We see ourselves as master conveners and try to accelerate resources and serendipity into these companies because we also believe that entrepreneurs are job creators. Easy example, a company that we support, Greenlight Planet, they looked at the problem of 1.3 billion people without electricity, said we need to do something about that. They replaced kerosene lanterns with solar lanterns. It was a startup about 8 years ago when we started working with them. Today they employ 12,000 people. They've brought solar to 26.3 million individuals, mostly in India and in East Africa. They've been profitable for the last 8 quarters. So one entrepreneur can do miraculous things. And if we start to look at entrepreneurs not just as solutions to these seemingly intractable problems, but also as job creators, I think we could do some pretty fantastic things.
Daniel, I'm going to ask you to be really candid here and tell the truth, okay? What do you think about you sitting at this table?
Oh, yeah, great.
And about what you've been hearing so far?
Yeah.
And be provocative and shake us up a bit. In 30 seconds.
Yeah, I took a photo of this because it's Denmark and the European Investment Bank and then a reasonable. So a part of it, I just love it. But I think that actually, Michael, what you said, that MasterCard sees an opportunity in doing well by doing good. Most of the world 10 years ago, we saw doing well and doing good as opposite ends of the spectrum, nonprofit, for-profit, public, private. I think that our thesis is not only that you can do well by doing good, but actually that you can do better than everybody else by doing more good than anybody else, that the future titans of industries are the companies who are creating the most amount of value by solving society's hardest problems. And I think that's a conversation that gets me excited. That's the type of conversation that shifts markets into the types of companies that are solving the hardest problems.
That's the voice of the private sector. All right, very good. I'm trying to remember where everybody put up their hands. I remember Annette, 'cause she's right here. Annette Dixon is the Vice President for Human Development at the World Bank. Annette, what did you want to add?
Well, actually, what I wanted to I agree with everything that Suma said about the importance of jobs for women. But I also worry a lot about angry young men. And for many countries in the world, peace will only be secured if there's jobs available for angry young men. And we've been trying to find different instruments that would de-risk investment in very fragile, conflict-prone countries. I've come most recently from working on South Asia in countries such as Afghanistan and other parts of South Asia. And I'm very aware of how tenuous the situation is at the moment. So my question is, what more can we do? What will it take to get investors to be game to partner with us in these really, really risky places? Because I think world peace, frankly, depends on us finding solutions for this.
Can you remind me where the other questions were, comments were? I know they were along this table. Yes, sir, please press your microphone.
Merci, je vais appuyer, mais mettez votre casque, votre écouteur aussi. Merci. Bon, j'ai entendu qu'il faut créer 40 millions d'emplois en Afrique, mais on ne parle pas des emplois qu'on va détruire à cause de la technologie, parce que beaucoup d'entreprises qui ont investi en Afrique, demain avec la robotique, avec le prototypage, vont ramener leur investissement dans les pays d'origine. Ça veut dire que la menace, non seulement de créer, mais de détruire. Et puis on parle du secteur privé. Le secteur privé, à court terme et à moyen terme, c'est une donnée. Il ne peut pas changer du jour au lendemain. Or, souvent, on investit dans des espaces où le secteur privé local ne peut pas investir. Donc, si on veut stimuler l'entreprise locale, il faut savoir aussi les compétences qui existent dans ces pays. Mais, pour préparer l'avenir, il faut de grandes universités en Afrique. Il faut former des jeunes. Ce sont les jeunes qu'on va former qui vont créer, qui vont innover pour demain. Mais si on prolonge le trend, eh bien, l'entreprise africaine ne peut pas changer du jour au lendemain. Il n'y a pas de miracle. Donc, c'est par l'école, par l'université, qu'on doit amener le changement. Or, chaque fois qu'il y a un élément qui est brillant en Afrique, il est pris gratuitement. Quand un footballeur quitte l'Afrique, on paie cher. Mais quand un scientifique quitte l'Afrique, ce sont ces pays qui les ont formés, ils partent, et ce sont les pays industrialisés qui en profitent. Donc aussi, il faut intégrer ça dans les échanges au niveau international. On ne peut pas se permettre de former. On emprunte pour former, et demain, on écrème la jeunesse et on laisse la pauvreté. Donc là aussi, il faut poser ces problèmes dans des termes clairs. Merci.
Thank you very much. Just a really important point to make and add to this conversation as we go forward with this agenda, I want to bring in the State Secretary for Development Policy in Denmark, that is Secretary Herman. Good afternoon. What have we not discussed in an intelligent way yet?
No, that's a tough question. A lot. Let me start by saying that I feel entirely at home sitting here next to Unreasonable. I must say, sometimes I feel we to some extent also overcomplicate matters, perhaps slightly. I think it was Kristalina who said that we should use public funds for the right things. Use public funds where only public funds can do the trick, and then perhaps use public funds where actually public funds can unlock private funds and unlock private investments where we can actually crowd the private sector. And I think that's a very important point. And then my second point, and perhaps we haven't discussed this enough, perhaps we need to take a much, much closer look at scaling what is actually already working instead of creating new thing. It was a little bit also, I think Agnes was referring to this. Let me just give two perspectives on this, two concrete examples. One is Danish. The other one is not Danish, but we were part of setting it up many years ago. Now, Denmark has for more than a decade been working on leveraging institutional investors in Denmark, Danish pension funds. And we have good experience. Pension funds have good experience with that, and now we are scaling this to an entirely new level. Later this year, we'll be launching an SDG fund to the tune of $1 billion, half of the funds coming from private Danish pension funds. The rest will come from government and our own development finance institution, which last year, by the way, invested more than $200 million together with private investors, creating local jobs, generating taxes, and being part of transferring technology. 13,000 jobs, by the way, last year alone. Now this thing about then scaling what is actually working, I think is important. Now, in 2011, the African Guarantee Fund was set up. Denmark was one of the founding mothers of this, together with the African Development Bank and Spain. And the African Guarantee Fund has active guarantees in 38 African countries. It has guaranteed loans to the tune of $800 million to 8,000 African small and medium-sized enterprises. That is 8,000 unreasonable African entrepreneurs, and more than half of them are women, generating almost 70,000 new jobs, and at the same time increasing productivities of small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa. Now, the African Guarantee Fund needs more money to do more good. It's already working. You don't need to create it one more time. Now, new shareholders are coming on board. Our French colleagues are coming on board. The Nordic Development Fund is coming on board. And I know that others are considering joining this too. And thus can help many of, if you like, Agnes's clients by providing what is absolutely necessary to start any business, and that is by providing capital. So my pledge is, let's scale what's already working instead of creating new where it might not be needed.
The Chief Innovation Officer for GE Healthcare in the United States is Terry Bressenham. You may remember that SDG goal number 8 is about creating jobs, more jobs and better jobs. So I'm thinking about the future of work and work trends, Terry. What can you tell us that might illuminate us on this goal to create better and more jobs?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And I think we are really hyper-focused on the environment for employability and localized employment opportunities. I think is both an employer of over 300,000 people around the world and long-term partners with the 180 countries that we operate in. But it is in some ways very simple. Where markets are not thriving, we can't thrive. So it is very important to us to contribute to this. As been mentioned, there are a number of challenges: a lack of infrastructure, the inadvertent lack of skills development on things that are relevant, and I think that's an important point to make. And if I look at healthcare as an example, it's estimated that 5.8 billion people in the world lack access to quality care. And no one in this room would think that's a very fair handshake to give people in this world. And on the other side of that equation is a real opportunity for us to create great jobs. The healthcare sector is one of the top employers in the developed markets. It's something that we want to invest in, and we feel very strongly about this. It's a way also to open up jobs that are clean, that are lifelong, that pay decent wages, and something that, as we look at women in the world, it's an important part of employability for women. I think there's two ways in which we think about this. One is around skills creation, and another is around skills upgradation or retooling. I'll give you an example. In India, where I'm based, we've partnered with the government to create a very innovative program to break apart what was some pretty antiquated approaches. And from that, we have targeted kids that are in the high school who have the marks but not the money to go to college, kids that have tremendous aspirations for their own personal lives. And as was mentioned, if we can employ young people with good jobs, the social fabric is reinforced. From very humble beginnings, I can tell you we started with one school. We now have more than 25 of these schools. The kids are being hired before they graduate. And our goal is obviously, it's not about a certificate or an accreditation, it's about employability. Another program which we've now invested more than $140 million through our G Foundation, and that's skills upgradation. So for example, taking nurses and creating nurse anesthesiasts, because there's not going to ever be enough anesthesiasts in most of these countries. They can do this extremely well, and it's something that contributes, again, to safe surgery around the world. Taking midwives and teaching them how to do prenatal exams with ultrasound and make sure that women go to institutions when they need to have an institutional delivery and not have problems. Or in the case of engineers or technicians, how to train them to be biomedical technicians so that the hospitals can operate, calibrate, and run their equipment effectively. So some very simple examples. The private-public partnership is an absolute must in these, and I think these are great ways for us to close the healthcare gap and bring more people into the workforce.
Thank you. I'm just going to check in with some people who spoke earlier because I don't want them to check out. Suma Chakrabarti.
So I'd like to respond to a couple of things. I think firstly,
can I make it one very important critical thing?
One very important thing, informal sector, which no one picked up earlier, the point made earlier. I think this is actually an increasing issue. This has been growing since the 1960s. By the way, Norway has one of the largest informal sectors in Europe, which is interesting in itself. And I think it's a lot to do, but you also have a very large formal sector too, so don't worry about it too much. But it's a quite interesting issue because I think a lot of it is to do with regulation, taxation, issues like that. What worries me about is parts of the informal sector, that particularly where there are lots of abuses of rights and so on. And those are parts that I'd like to get much more into the formal sector. But De Soto wrote about this in the 80s, and there's a lot of stuff about really needing to look at regulation to try and actually get more of the informal sector into the formal sector, into better quality jobs, which is the point I think you also made as well. And that, I think, is a thing that MDBs particularly do need to focus in on.
So just because you spoke earlier doesn't mean that you're off the hook. All right. Jennifer Blank is the Vice President of Agriculture, Human and Social Development at the African Development Bank. Jennifer, can you help us out with this overall approach of multilateral development banks? Where should they be focusing on?
So, I mean, again, coming at this from an African perspective, and a few people have touched on the numbers. If you look at 12 million young people coming into the workforce every year and maybe 3 million people, 3 million jobs waiting for them, if you just let that sink in for a second, it touches on a lot of the issues that have been raised. And so I think at our bank, jobs are front and center of everything that we do. And it's one of the guiding lights and one of the most important initiatives that we have, which is Jobs for Youth in Africa, where we directly want to create 25 million jobs over the next 10 years and train up 50 million. But in order to do that, given that we have fewer resources maybe than some of our larger sister MDBs, we have to be very structured about it. And so how are we doing that? I think, first of all, we're making sure that we are not financing operations that don't have a job creation element. So from the get-go, when we're developing projects, making sure that we're understanding what the job creation will be, and then KPIing it, so to speak, making sure that we then will measure how people do in terms of creating those jobs. We're running trainings right now for our colleagues because indeed it does require a bit of a shift in terms of mindset. But it's really important to also think about the fact, and others have mentioned that, it's great to sort of say you're going to create the jobs, but if you don't have those young people or people in general who are trained up to be able to do it, you don't have the skills that are meeting the jobs, then that won't work at all anyway. So we're ensuring that we're rolling out in everything that we do as well, training. And I just want to say, picking up on what Terry was talking about, it is very important to have the private sector involved in this process, whether it's in the curriculum of the school or whether it's the TVET or whether it is, the internships or anything else. If you don't have the private sector involved, they don't have a crystal ball about what the future looks like with technology destroying jobs. But at least they know what you need now. And so we're ensuring that the private sector is involved with us every step of the way as we do roll that out. And finally, I'd just say making sure, and this touches on what Agnes was talking about, the importance of really looking at those sectors where you know that job creation will be powerful. In Africa, it's obviously agribusiness. We're trying to get people out of agriculture and moving up the value chain. And so just in the last 34 seconds that I have, maybe just to illustrate this, is an effort that we are rolling out called Enable Youth, where we take young graduates from university. That's the group we're looking at, and they could have studied anything, and quite often they went to good schools but maybe studied philosophy or whatever. That's fine. But we then take them and we train them up in agribusiness. How do you start a business plan? How do you run a business? And get them excited about creating that next generation of businesses, and then provide them with seed funding, either through things like Boost Africa, which we're looking forward to, or the African Guarantee Fund. So, and finally, even if I'm going a little bit over time, I think that the millennials that are coming up have a different approach to creating businesses. They look around them and they see challenges, and those are amazing opportunities. And I truly believe that the way that businesses are being created in Africa and elsewhere right now is very different. It's much more socially focused, and I hope much more job creation oriented.
Thank you. Agnes, your name has been used an awful lot in this conversation. Would you like to respond to anybody briefly?
No, I think instead I would like to raise something that nobody else has said. I like the reference being made to skills. I just wanted to bring out the fact that the biggest challenge we have on the continent in terms of investing in private sector is just the capability, the private sector capability as it stands now. And so being able to design tools and financial instruments that take into account the fact that even private sector capacity needs to be grown, TF facilities that help them develop products, build the right products, build skills, but also access capital and continue growing their capacity to use capital well, is something that we haven't discussed and yet is very critical to how African private sector will develop.
If you could choose anybody in this room to have dinner with this evening, who would you pick?
The Norwegian Minister of...
Norwegian Minister, do we have a date?
It will have to be on the plane, I'm afraid. But
I should ask the entire table that, but we don't have time.
I mean, he talked about
everybody has a sigh of relief now.
About a big business coming up in Ethiopia, and just recognizing that linking development money to private money is big. Yeah.
And of course, my question was purely about policy and partnership and networking and nothing else. All right, if you feel that you have the most important question in the room, put your hand up. Oh, all right, very good. Nobody. Is that nobody? Oh. Stand up. Can you stand up so I can see you? What's the most important question? Go to the microphone. The most important question in the room. And it has to be a very short one. While you walk there, I'm going to bring in somebody else, so you're standing by, okay? And it will be very brief, and the microphone is live. It's interesting because when I asked earlier about questions, Manish Mahuka, he signaled to me, but he is actually one of our speakers. So your question and your response can be in the same time. Manish Mahuka is the Vice President for Corporate Strategy and Resources at the International Finance Corporation. You may know it better as the IFC. What was your question, And then what did you want to add to our conversation?
No, my question was simply that my IFC brand card was on the other side of the table. I just wanted it brought here. But now with that...
Oh, it was a logistics thing. Okay. Yes, we worked that out. Somebody gave me a note. I like the fact that you're disrupting even in the boardroom. All right, Vice President. What do you want to tell us?
Thank you. So let me, like our AFTB colleague, begin by just stating the scale of the problem in maybe a slightly more dramatic way. So as per our estimates, in the developing world, based on labor force projections over the next 15 years, we are looking at a job deficit, a requirement to create jobs of 2.6 million per month. And about half of this, 1.3 million, will be in Africa, the requirement, just based on the demographics. So what are we going to do? And I think a lot of very good points have been made. I think fundamental to this is what we heard from our colleague from Unreasonable. The points that you made were actually perfectly reasonable. That at the root of this is the solution is this whole idea of entrepreneurship, which is what we really talk about at the core when we talk about supporting SMEs. And I'm going to just emphasize the point that Kristalina made right in the beginning about MFD and just re-emphasize that the key point about maximizing finance for development, to my mind and to our mind in IFC, is to allow wherever and whenever possible private sector solutions to enable a self-sustaining cycle of investments, growth, and job creation. And that's the link. And this is what we think market creation is all about. So in terms of supporting entrepreneurship and SMEs as a development institution, what can we exactly do? And I'm just going to quickly illustrate through examples on 4 themes. And these themes have been covered earlier: de-risking, mobilizing, advising, and incubating. And quick example of each. On the de-risking side, given the challenges of financing SMEs, we have to look at this, if we have to scale it up, at a portfolio level. We do this traditionally by financing SMEs via banks and financial intermediaries. And this is where we can bring in the de-risking tools, including blended finance tools. In terms of mobilizing, one of our most innovative recent instruments is this managed co-lending portfolio program, which specifically in the sector of financial inclusion has actually enabled us to bring private sector global institutional investors into supporting SME finance. On advice, we are clearly deepening our jobs focus in our activities by combining investment and advisory and capacity building. And this is applied to supply chains and even gender programs. As an example, our Better Work program in collaboration with ILO continues to improve working conditions along supply chains in the garment industry. And finally, I'll take a quick point on the incubation side. One of the examples is a fund that we sponsored called Tech Emerge. This is to actually help finance early stage creative ideas, particularly in technology, in the developing world. And it has gained some good traction, that we are seeing. So let me stop there and we'll look forward to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now to the most important question in the room. What a build-up. It better be good. Good afternoon. It is live. Go ahead.
Thank you. That's a very tall order. Thank you. So this question is addressed to Ms. Blanc and Mrs. Brissenham from GE Healthcare. And it's a question regarding biotechnology and that space. So currently I'm at IFC in the fintech arena, and about 2 years ago, I helped start a biotech company. It was a 2-man team, and it's grown to about 16 people. And one of the questions that I had was, what is GE's current initiatives in terms of resources and funding for taking a biotech company from not early stage, mid stage to market value? So for an example, we filed for 11 patent applications, 3 are approved, and we're in the final stages of launching this biotech application to treat the prevention of HIV/AIDS and hepatitis C in Southeast Asia. So I wanted to know from GE's perspective.
All right, so what I feel that this is you two should get together and have this conversation in more depth than you can have it in public with everyone around here. So let me just check your schedule. What are you doing in the next 10 minutes?
Hopefully meeting with GE Healthcare.
Okay. And what are you doing in the next 10 minutes?
If you don't mind, I will make one quick comment on this,
All right,
because
please.
I think it does
but
apply.
But can I also get you to
yes,
get,
absolutely.
Okay, very good.
On the SMEs, and I Tech Emerge, by the way, is a great program. So we did launch an incubator. It's called 5.8 for the purpose of the 5.8 billion people that lack access. And our whole notion is, in the countries you operate, in Africa, in ASEAN, and India, is to help incubate the commercial scaling of an idea. So post-Series A, typically, where it is always hard. Once you have validated the product will work, how do you get that out into the marketplace? How do you support that in the market? So that is one way we're doing that. Another is through our Ventures Capital Fund, which we do invest in small companies.
So it was the most important question in the room, but for you specifically, would you walk around here and find a seat here? Because then you're more likely to connect after our session, which is almost about to end. All right, very good. So now, everybody, you can nod again, all right? I'm not going to pick on you anymore. I want to commend you on your fantastic timekeeping. And I have one last job to do as your moderator, and that is to ask Johannes Hahn, he's the Commissioner for the European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations, who he would like to have dinner with this evening. Who's at this ballroom?
Actually, with my wife, she was.
I know, but it's spring meetings. You have to work.
She's just arriving. That's why I'm still perplexed that she couldn't make it to come. And yeah, this is my evening program.
Commissioner, please close the session for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much too. First, a few comments to what I've heard in the last couple of minutes. First, I think we should think if we shouldn't change, so to say, the notion. We are always speaking about donors. I would prefer to speak about investors, because being an investor is something different than being a donor. This is also about mindset. Second, it's about money needs stability. If you invest, you want to have a kind of stability. So it's also about working with our partners, political partners on the ground. For instance, talking about the situation in Africa, legal framework was one of the key words. Institution building is something else. So I think this is something where we also have to invest. Fourth, some people were talking about education and so on. I think one other key word is lifelong learning. I think I'm not really aware that there's any education system which really serves this concept that people are able to learn how to learn. I think we should be aware that during your professional life you have to change today 5 to 8 times not only your job but the substance of your job, and so you have to be, so to say, experienced enough to adapt to the new challenges. So I think we have to invest all in this. Based to that, in particular around Europe, we face a lot of brain drain towards Europe. And when I'm talking with our neighboring countries, on the one hand, they ask for more scholarships to Europe, more access to research activities. On the other hand, they fear that these students, these researchers coming to Europe won't return. So we have to look into more creative concepts, how we offer, so to say, better access to training, to research facilities, but not on the other hand provoke that people stay. Of course, it should not be, so to say, prohibited, but finally we should have a more intelligent concept how we offer the opportunity that people return back. And this leads me to something else, which I would summarize: access to finance. I think we should, for instance, as Europeans, look if we can offer certain financial programs which are dedicated to people having spent some of their lifetime abroad and are ready to go back. So it's something where we should address people abroad or diaspora in order to go back and to found their own companies, etc. Further on, it's also about, I would call it mentality changes. In some countries, it's not very highly ranking at the societal, so say, acceptance to work, for instance, as a craftsman. But this is something very important for the functioning of a society, and actually probably you can earn in that respect more than as an academics. So also this is something which has to be addressed. In that respect, I really want to refer, and I suppose it has already been done. Unfortunately, I was not here from the very beginning, but the European Union just has created an external investment plan which should enable European companies to enter foreign markets and to get guarantees for the risks which they face there. And I hope this can contribute for creating new job opportunities. And finally, this is exactly, so to say, our philosophy. Either we export stability or we'll import instability. And I think this is exactly what guides us in our policy, in the products we try to develop. And I would like to thank World Bank and other financial institutions to contribute to these efforts. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you, Boardroom. Have a very good afternoon. Take care, everybody.